Officer Ben Walker never expected a quiet summer evening in Bend to become the night that would change his heart forever. From the dusty roadside came two tiny German Shepherd puppies, trembling, crying, refusing to let him leave. At first, he thought they were lost. But when they began tugging at his uniform and leading him toward the forest, something deep inside told him this was no coincidence. Each bark carried desperation, a cry for help too pure to ignore. What Ben found hidden beneath the fallen branches would break him, heal him, and remind the world that miracles don't always roar. Sometimes they whisper through the smallest hearts. The heat of July lay thick over Bend, Oregon, pressing down like a hand that refused to lift. The pine-scented air shimmered above the dirt roads, and even the birds seemed too tired to sing. In the distance, two small figures darted through the brush, two German Shepherd puppies, no more than 3 months old. Their paws were raw, their fur matted with dust and streaks of dry mud. Scout, the braver of the two, had a sharp black mask around his amber eyes and a small notch on his right ear. He carried himself with the clumsy determination of a young soldier who hadn't yet learned fear. Beside him stumbled Maggie, smaller, her coat a lighter tan, her eyes wide and trembling like drops of honey in sunlight. She was timid, forever glancing back toward the forest, as if she could still hear the soft whine of the mother they'd left behind. That mother, Nova, had been the pride of Ben's K-9 division. A 6-year-old German Shepherd with a coat once sleek and dark as wet stone, now dulled by exhaustion and pain. Hours earlier, while on a mountain trail assisting in a local search for missing hikers, the hillside had given way beneath her. The roar of breaking branches and sliding earth swallowed her bark, leaving only the forest to bear witness. Trapped beneath the collapsed slope, one hind leg pinned by a thick branch, she had forced herself to breathe shallowly, ears flicking for her pups. When they pressed against her muzzle, crying, she nudged them toward the open woods, one last command of instinct and love. And somehow, they understood. Now Scout and Maggie raced toward the scent of asphalt and humans, paws burning on the hot dust. The world outside the forest was too bright, too loud, filled with smells they didn't know. Gasoline, metal, bread baking in faraway kitchens. The sound of engines and distant laughter frightened Maggie. She yelped and froze when a pickup thundered past. Scout barked, sharp and insistent, nudging her forward. His instincts told him help was close. Somewhere out there was someone like Nova had described, the kind of human who didn't just give orders but listened, who smelled of trust and sweat and leather. That man was Officer Ben Walker, 33 years old, and 3 years into what he privately called his second life. Broad-shouldered and tall, with the build of a man who used to lift weights but no longer needed to prove anything. He had short, dark blonde hair, sunburned skin, and the kind of eyes that looked permanently squinted from years spent outdoors. There was a faint scar along his jawline, a souvenir from his time as a Marine before joining the Bend Police Department. Those who knew him said Ben was calm, unshakable, and slow to smile. But when he did, it was like the world got a brief reprieve. What most didn't see was the quiet ache that still followed him. The memory of his old K-9 partner, Rex, who hadn't survived a drug raid 2 summers ago. Since then, Ben had stopped, volunteering for K-9 duty altogether. He still carried Rex's old collar in the glove box, out of habit or guilt. He wasn't sure which. That afternoon, Ben's patrol car idled near the Pioneer Park fountain, where families gathered to escape the heat. He had just unscrewed his water bottle when a blur of movement caught his eye. 2 puppies sprinting across the dusty road. He frowned, setting the bottle aside. The first, the larger one, ran straight toward him, barking in quick, uneven bursts. The second followed hesitantly, her tail tucked low. "Hey there," he muttered, stepping out of the car. "Where'd you two come from?" Scout approached with bold urgency, pawing at Ben's boot, then turning in circles, barking toward the forest. Maggie sat a few feet behind, panting, her tongue lolling in fear and exhaustion. Ben crouched, holding out a hand. The heat radiated from the pavement, shimmering between them. "Easy," he said softly, his voice a low drawl shaped by years of patience. When Scout didn't bite or flinch, Ben noticed the pup's collar. No tag, just a frayed leather strap marked K9 unit. His heart clenched. Someone's working dog, then. Someone trained. Scout barked again, insistent, pawing at his pant leg before tugging it toward the woods. "You want me to follow you, huh?" Ben murmured, half amused, half uneasy. The puppy's gaze was too focused to be random. Something in those amber eyes held a message, a plea that bypassed logic and went straight to instinct. Maggie whined, circling her brother, as if urging Ben to hurry. He glanced toward the tree line where heat waves shimmered like ghosts. The sensible thing would be to call animal control, but something about the raw desperation of these two stopped him cold. Ben straightened slowly, squinting into the forest. "All right, little soldiers," he said under his breath, sliding his sunglasses onto his head. "Show me what's wrong." The moment he spoke, Scout barked once, sharp and triumphant, before darting back toward the trees. Maggie hesitated, looking up at Ben for permission, then bounded after her brother. As Ben followed, the city's noise faded behind him. The air cooled slightly beneath the shade of ponderosa pines, and the scent of resin and dust filled his lungs. His boots crunched on dry leaves as he trailed the pups through narrow paths and slanting light. Somewhere ahead, unseen, lay the reason these two had risked everything to find him. He didn't know yet that in less than an hour, he would meet their mother, and that the encounter would change the course of his quiet, guarded life forever. The air beneath the pines was cooler, but heavy with resin and dust, wrapping around Officer Ben Walker like a cloak. His boots sank into soft soil as he followed the two German Shepherd pups weaving through the underbrush. Scout ran ahead, with the confidence of a soldier certain of his mission, tail stiff, nose close to the ground. Maggie stayed closer to Ben, looking back every few steps to make sure the towering human still followed. The forest light shifted as the sun began to lower, painting streaks of orange and gold through the branches. Insects buzzed lazily in the heat. Ben could still feel the pulse of the city somewhere behind him, the faint hum of cars and distant laughter, yet the forest seemed to swallow everything else. It had a silence that wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He hadn't been in the woods much since leaving the Marines. Trees reminded him of the outposts, of shadows that hid noise and danger. But there was something about the two dogs that steadied him. Maybe it was the trust in their eyes. Maybe it was how their small bodies carried so much purpose. He adjusted his utility belt, feeling the familiar tug of his flashlight, radio, and sidearm. The smell of pine needles and dry bark stirred old memories, the kind he usually drowned with work and silence. After several minutes, Ben spotted a narrow dirt trail curving upward, the soil cracked and loose. Scout barked once, loud and sharp. It echoed strangely through the trees. "All right, lead on," Ben muttered, wiping sweat from his temple. Maggie trotted beside him now, her paws brushing against his boot every few steps, her breaths quick and shallow. They climbed until the trails opened into a small clearing scarred by a recent landslide. Half the slope had caved in, spilling rocks and branches down into a tangled heap. The smell of wet earth was thick here, mixed with something faint and metallic. Blood. Ben froze. Scout stood near the edge, barking frantically, circling a mound of branches. Maggie whimpered, pawing at the ground, dirt spraying from her small claws. Ben hurried forward, kneeling beside them. His fingers brushed against fur beneath the debris, coarse, matted, still warm. He moved fast then, hands pulling away loose branches and stones until a shape began to form. The body of a full-grown German shepherd, half buried. Her breathing was shallow, sides barely rising. One hind leg was twisted under a fallen limb, and blood seeped slowly from a scrape along her ribs. The metal glint of a broken tag caught the fading sunlight. K9 unit. Nova. Jesus, Ben whispered. He touched her gently, testing her pulse. Still alive. He looked at Scout and Maggie, both trembling, but refusing to leave her side. He recognized something fierce in their behavior, a kind of desperate loyalty that humans rarely manage to keep. "You did good, kids," he murmured, his voice rough. "You found help." He pulled his radio, pressing the call button. "Dispatch, this is Officer Walker. I've got an injured K9, adult female, alive but trapped near Forest Trail 9 East Ridge, requesting immediate animal rescue." The radio hissed with static. Then a woman's voice crackled through. "Copy that, Officer Walker. Rescue ETA approximately 90 minutes. Can you stabilize?" He looked down at Nova's mangled leg and the dust coating her fur. 90 minutes in this heat? No chance. "I'll do what I can," he said quietly, releasing the button. He slid off his outer shirt, folding it into a makeshift pillow for her head. The pups pressed against her, whining softly, as if telling her the human could be trusted. Ben scanned the area. The slope looked unstable. The fallen limb that pinned Nova wasn't massive, but it was wedged under other debris. He braced himself, pressing his shoulder against it. Muscles strained, breath caught in his chest, and slowly the branch shifted, groaning as it rolled aside. Dust billowed, sticking to the sweat on his arms. Nova gasped sharply, her paw twitching. Ben exhaled, lowering himself beside her. A faint rustle came from behind him. Turning, he saw a woman approaching from the trail, a tall figure in a khaki ranger uniform. She moved with steady grace, her boots quiet even on the gravel. "Officer Walker?" she called, voice low but firm. She looked about 30, with copper hair tied into a braid that brushed her shoulder, freckles scattered over sun-browned skin. Her green eyes were focused, but kind. Her name tag read Ranger Emily Carter. "That's me," Ben replied, standing. "You the one dispatch sent?" She nodded, kneeling beside Nova. "I was closest to the ridge. God, she's in bad shape." She touched Nova's flank gently, assessing. "She's dehydrated and probably concussed. We'll need a stretcher." "I radioed for one, but it'll take time," Ben said. "I couldn't wait." Emily met his gaze, calm, direct. "You did the right thing." She studied him briefly, noticing the marine tattoo on his forearm, the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes. She'd seen that look before, someone carrying ghosts. "Help me keep her cool. I'll grab water from my pack." As she poured water onto a torn cloth and dabbed Nova's muzzle, Scout crept closer, sniffing her cautiously. Emily smiled faintly. "Hey there, little one," she murmured, her voice softening. You're the brave one, huh? Maggie wagged her tail nervously, pressing against Ben's boot. Together, they worked in silence, the late sunlight fading into amber shadows. Ben held Nova's head steady while Emily wrapped her leg. Every so often, Nova would lift her eyes to meet his, glazed but aware. That look struck something deep in him, something he hadn't felt since Rex. Gratitude, trust, and pain all at once. When they finally stepped back, the clearing had grown quiet again, scout and cool. Maggie curled beside their mother, their small bodies trembling against her flank. Emily stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "We'll keep her stable," she said softly. "Rescue's on the way." Ben nodded, but his gaze stayed fixed on the dog. "She's a fighter," he whispered. Emily followed his eyes, then glanced back toward the horizon, where the sun sank behind the trees, painting the sky the color of ash and flame. In that dim light, surrounded by the sound of breathing, human and canine, Ben Walker realized something had shifted inside him. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was a promise. The night deepened over Bend, wrapping the forest in a blanket of darkness that shimmered with fireflies. The air was still warm, but cooler than before, and Ben Walker could feel every muscle in his shoulders tightening as he crouched beside Nova. The forest rescue team had not yet arrived, and though Ranger Emily Carter kept her calm composure, Ben could see the faint tremor in her fingers as she checked the bandages again. The flashlight's beam cut thin lines through drifting dust. Scout and Maggie lay curled near their mother, heads resting on her paws, their eyes half open as if afraid to sleep. Nova's breathing had steadied, though it came shallow, and Ben could hear each breath like a fragile thread between life and loss. "Her pulse is faint, but she's holding," Emily said softly, her voice low and even. She knelt beside Nova, her braid sticking to her neck with sweat. "If we can keep her hydrated until the team gets here, she might make it." Ben nodded, pressing a damp cloth to Nova's muzzle. "She's a fighter, you can tell." His tone was quiet but firm, the same voice he once used to steady recruits under fire. Emily studied him briefly, catching the flicker of something behind his eyes, a shadow that wasn't from the trees. In the distance, a faint rumble of an engine broke the silence. Headlights flickered through the trees as a rescue truck appeared on the ridge, its light bouncing over rocks and brush. Relief washed over Emily's face. "That's them." The truck pulled to a stop, and two figures climbed out. The first was Dr. Laura Bennett, the town's veterinary surgeon, a woman in her mid-40s with silver streaks running through her chestnut hair. Her tan scrubs were already smeared with dirt, and she carried herself with the practiced urgency of someone who'd spent too many nights patching up animals from accidents and wild rescues. Her face, sharp-edged yet kind, carried deep lines at the corners of her eyes, a mix of fatigue and compassion. "You the officer who called?" she asked, voice brisk. "Yeah," Ben replied. "She's still breathing but weak, been pinned for hours." Laura nodded once, kneeling beside Nova with a gentle efficiency that demanded silence. She examined the leg, her brow furrowing. "Compound fracture. Lucky you found her when you did." Then she glanced at the two pups huddled close. "And these must be hers." "They led me here," Ben said quietly. "Didn't stop until I followed." Laura gave a faint, approving smile. "Smart kids." She gestured toward the truck. "Mark, bring the stretcher." The second rescuer, Mark Duran, appeared moments later. He was a stocky man in his late 30s, his arms sunburned, beard trimmed close to his face. Mark was a local firefighter who volunteered with the animal rescue unit whenever he could. His demeanor was steady, practical, a man who preferred action to talk. Years earlier, he'd lost his sister in a car crash, and since then, he had taken up every rescue call with a sense of quiet penance. "Let's get her loaded," he said simply. Ben helped lift Nova gently onto the stretcher, his hands careful as though touching glass. She whimpered once, a sound so faint it nearly broke him. Scout barked, tail rigid, refusing to move from her side until Ben scooped him up. Maggie followed close, pressing against Ben's chest as he stood. "Easy, girl," he whispered. "We've got her now." The rescue team moved swiftly, securing Nova with straps and lifting her into the truck bed. Emily stayed behind a moment, watching the trees sway faintly under the breeze. "She'll make it," she said, her tone more hope than certainty. Ben looked at her, the corners of his mouth tightening. "I'll believe it when I see her walk again." The drive back to Bend felt longer than the trek up the mountain. Scout and Maggie lay in Ben's lap in the passenger seat, their small chests rising and falling against his arm. He kept one hand on their backs, his thumb moving absent-mindedly over their fur, the same way he used to steady Rex before missions. The flashing red lights from the rescue truck ahead bounced off the trees, turning the forest into a shifting sea of scarlet and black. When they reached the Bend Veterinary Clinic, the night air carried the smell of wet asphalt and sage. Inside, the clinic was bright and sterile, the hum of equipment filling the quiet. Laura directed her small team with practiced ease. "Let's prep room 2. I-4 line ready. Sedative at half dose. She's dehydrated." Ben stood in the doorway, Scout and Maggie at his feet. He didn't realize how tense he was until Emily touched his shoulder lightly. "You did more than anyone could have asked," she said softly. Her green eyes caught the fluorescent light, their calm piercing through his fatigue. He exhaled slowly, his voice barely audible. "It's not enough if she doesn't make it." Emily hesitated, then said, "You've lost one before, haven't you?" Ben's jaw tightened. "Rex, 2 years ago. Drug bust gone bad. I told myself I wouldn't go through it again." His gaze dropped to the pups. "And yet, here I am." Emily didn't reply, only nodded as if she understood the kind of wound words couldn't touch. An hour later, Laura emerged from the surgery room, gloves streaked with blood, but eyes steady. "She's stable for now. It'll take time, but she's a fighter." Her gaze flicked to Ben. "You were the right person to find her." Ben's chest eased for the first time that night. He looked down at Scout and Maggie, who were watching through the glass door, their tails twitching with restless hope. "She's gonna need them," he said quietly. "And maybe they'll need me." Outside, dawn began to blur the horizon into pale gold. The mountain loomed behind them, silent again, as if the earth had repaid a debt. The morning after the rescue dawned slow and golden over Bend. Sunlight spilled through the wide glass windows of the Bend Veterinary Clinic, catching on the metal trays and glinting off the polished floors. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and pine resin drifting in from the open windows. Officer Ben Walker sat in the waiting area, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the narrow hallway that led to the recovery rooms. He hadn't slept. His uniform shirt was wrinkled, the edge of his badge dull with fingerprints. Scout and Maggie lay at his boots, exhausted but restless, their heads occasionally lifting whenever footsteps echoed from the back. A young nurse, Tina Morales, walked by carrying a tray of gauze and medication. She couldn't have been more than 24, with olive skin, short black hair tucked behind her ears, and a patient's gentleness in every movement. "You've been here all night," she said quietly, pausing beside him. "You should go home, officer." Ben rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Not until I know she's awake." Tina smiled faintly, the kind that mixed empathy and resignation. "Dr. Bennett will tell you when she's stable. She's got a good heart, that dog. Most wouldn't have survived what she did." He gave a slow nod. "She's tougher than most people I know." The nurse crouched briefly, giving the puppies a scratch behind their ears. Scout leaned into her hand, tail wagging weakly, while Maggie pressed her nose against the nurse's wrist. "They've been good," she said, glancing up at Ben. "You must have a way with them." "Not really," he muttered. "They just trust too easily." Tina straightened, her tone soft but knowing. "Sometimes that's what saves them." She disappeared down the hall before he could answer. Moments later, the door opened, and Dr. Laura Bennett stepped out, removing her gloves. There were faint smudges of fatigue beneath her eyes, but her expression carried something lighter than the night before. "She's awake," she said simply. Ben stood so quickly the chair legs scraped the tile. "Can I see her?" Laura gestured toward the hall. "A few minutes won't hurt. Keep it calm. She's disoriented." He followed her into the recovery ward, where the rhythmic hum of monitors filled the silence. Nova lay on a padded table, her leg wrapped neatly, her fur brushed clean. The sunlight filtering through the blinds gave her coat a sheen of soft gold. When she turned her head and her dark eyes found him, something in Ben's chest unclenched. Scout barked once, sharp and high-pitched, breaking into happy whines. Maggie followed with a chorus of smaller sounds, tail thumping against the floor. Ben approached slowly, kneeling beside the table. "Hey, girl," he said softly. "You gave us a scare." Nova's ears twitched. Her gaze flicked between him and the two pups, who had scrambled to her side, licking at her muzzle. Her breathing steadied as she recognized them. Dr. Bennett smiled faintly. "Family reunion," she murmured, adjusting the IV line. "Her vitals are improving. She'll need weeks of rest, but she's not out of danger yet." Ben nodded. "Whatever it takes." Laura looked at him for a moment before saying, "We'll need someone to foster her during recovery. She can't stay here long." He hesitated, caught off guard by the question. He wasn't sure why the idea both frightened and grounded him. Before he could answer, Emily Carter, the park ranger, entered the room carrying a box of supplies. Her uniform was replaced by a soft flannel shirt and jeans, her copper braid loose around her shoulders. "Morning," she greeted, her voice calm but carrying a warmth that hadn't been there the night before. She smiled at the sight before her. "Looks like she's got her whole team back." Laura glanced at her. "You're here early." Emily shrugged, setting down the box. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd check in." Her eyes met Ben's briefly, a quiet understanding passing between them, the kind that grows between people who have faced the same darkness and survived. As the others tended to equipment, Ben stayed kneeling by Nova. He could feel the weight of the decision forming in his chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to care. Yet when Nova's paw shifted weakly to rest against his arm, he knew the answer. "I'll take her," he said finally. Both women looked up. Laura's brows rose, then softened. "You sure? It's a lot of responsibility." Ben's voice steadied. "I owe her that much. And the pups, too." Emily's lips curved into a quiet smile. "Guess your house just got louder." For the first time in days, Ben laughed, a low, surprised sound that caught even him off guard. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe that's what it needs." Later that afternoon, the clinic staff helped prepare Nova for transport. Scout and Maggie were already bounding around Ben's feet, their energy returning like spring after a long frost. Emily stood by the door, arms crossed, watching him with a look that mixed admiration and worry. "You're good with them," she said. "I'm learning," he replied, sliding Nova's carrier into the back of his truck. The golden light of evening painted the sky, the scent of sage and sun-warmed pine filling the air. Emily extended her hand. "If you ever need help, you know where to find me." Ben shook it, his grip firm but grateful. "I might take you up on that." As he drove away, the dogs quieted in the back seat, their reflections flickering in the mirror. For the first time in a long while, Ben felt the road ahead wasn't empty. It was leading him home, to something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. The road back to Ben Walker's house wound through the outskirts of Bend, where pine trees stood like sentinels and the smell of warm earth filled the air. The late summer sun was dipping low, throwing amber light across the truck's windshield. In the back seat, Nova rested on a folded blanket, her injured leg secured in a soft brace, while Scout and Maggie lay beside her, their tails thumping softly with each bump in the road. The hum of the engine mixed with the soft panting of the dogs, creating a rhythm that felt strangely peaceful. For Ben, it had been years since he'd shared this kind of silence, one that wasn't empty, but full of presence. When he reached home, the small one-story cabin felt different. It had been built decades ago on a quiet lot at the edge of the forest, a place meant for solitude. The wooden porch creaked under his boots, and the scent of cedar lingered faintly in the walls. Inside, the living room was neat but sterile, a couch too stiff, a coffee table too bare, the faint hum of an old refrigerator filling the space. It looked less like a home and more like a place someone had been passing through for too long. He carried Nova gently to a corner of the room where he had spread a large comforter over the floor. "Easy now," he murmured, lowering her down. She settled immediately, eyes flicking between him and the two pups. Scout circled twice before lying down beside her, while Maggie pressed against Nova's neck, as if to reassure herself that their mother was real and safe. Ben crouched there for a moment, watching the three of them breathe together. Something in his chest, long locked away, began to ease. The next few days passed in a slow rhythm. Mornings began with the sound of Scout scratching at the door, eager to explore, and ended with Nova asleep by the window, her head resting on her paws as dusk painted the world gold. Ben took leave from the department, saying only that he needed time off. His captain didn't question it. Everyone in the precinct knew Ben's reputation, steady, capable, but haunted. They'd all seen what losing his old K9 partner, Rex, had done to him. Some wounds never healed, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of memory pressing quite as hard. One afternoon, while cleaning the porch, Ben noticed a figure approaching up the gravel path. It was Mrs. Ellen Graves, his elderly neighbor, a widow in her late 70s who lived 2 houses down. She was short, a bit stooped, but sharp-eyed, with a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over her lined face. Her silver hair was braided neatly, and she wore gardening gloves dusted with soil. Ellen was known around the neighborhood for her sharp tongue and soft heart, a woman who had lost her husband to cancer years ago, but still baked pies for every newcomer who moved in. "Well, well," she said, leaning on the porch railing. Officer Walker finally got himself some company. Her eyes softened when she spotted the dogs through the open doorway. A whole family, too. You've been holding out on us. Ben smiled faintly, just helping them recover. Ellen peered inside, her expression tender. That one there, she said, nodding toward Nova. She's got the eyes of an old soul, and those pups, Lord, they'll tear through your house in a week. Already started, he said, glancing at the chewed corner of his shoe. She chuckled, then grew quieter. Good for you, Ben. You've been too quiet too long. A house needs noise to feel alive. With that, she handed him a basket of fresh bread and made her way back down the path, humming a hymn that drifted through the evening air. Later, as the sun sank behind the trees, Ben sat on the porch steps with a mug of coffee. Scout sprawled across his lap while Maggie chased moths in the yard. Nova lay nearby, her ears twitching at the distant sounds of cicadas. The world felt small, safe, and strangely whole. His phone buzzed beside him. It was a message from Ranger Emily Carter. Checking in. How's she doing? Ben smiled, typing back. Stronger every day. You should visit. Scout misses bossing people around. A few minutes later came her reply. Tomorrow morning, then. I'll bring treats. For the dogs, not you. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. Scout perked up at the sound, tilting his head curiously, as if surprised by the sound of his human laughing. Ben reached down, ruffling his fur. Yeah, buddy, he murmured. I think we're gonna be okay. That night, sleep came easily. The soft sound of breathing filled the cabin, 3 rhythms syncing into one. Outside, the forest whispered beneath the moonlight. For the first time since Rex's death, Ben didn't dream of loss. He dreamed of pine trees, sunlight, and 3 sets of paw prints leading him home. Sometimes, the miracles we wait for don't arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly, on 4 legs, carrying trust in their eyes. Officer Ben Walker thought his days of faith and purpose were behind him. But through the love of a wounded mother and her 2 brave pups, he found what so many of us forget: that God still works through the smallest lives, the simplest acts of kindness, and the quiet moments when our hearts finally open again. Every sunrise, every breath, every chance to help another soul. Those are the real miracles. They may not make headlines, but they change lives. Maybe yours, maybe someone else's. So if this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope is never lost. Leave your thoughts below. Tell us where you're watching from, or share your own story of faith and compassion. And if you believe in second chances, in love that heals, and in the unseen hand of God guiding even the broken paths, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. May the Lord bless you, keep you, and remind you, even in your darkest nights, that you are never walking alone.